4 World Cup titles. The country that didn't just play football, it defined it. For decades, when the world wanted to understand what the beautiful game was supposed to look like at its absolute ceiling, they looked at one place. One nation, one identity, so deeply fused with the sport itself that separating the two felt almost blasphemous. And now, they're watching the World Cup on television again. Not once, not twice, 3 consecutive World Cups. 3 without Italy. Here's the thing, nobody in Italian football wants to say out loud, and I'm going to say it anyway. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a rough cycle. This wasn't a generation gap, or a tactical misalignment, or whatever comfortable excuse the Federation is currently hiding behind. This was a collapse, slow, structural, and entirely preventable. And the most damning part, someone warned them, specifically, repeatedly, loudly enough that you'd have to be willfully deaf not to hear it. That someone was José Mourinho. Not a pundit, not a journalist, not some blogger with an opinion. The man who built one of the greatest club sides in Serie A history. The man who walked into the San Siro and made Europe kneel. The man who understood Italian football from the inside, its bones, its culture, its rot. He saw exactly where this was heading. They didn't listen. And right now, Italy isn't at the World Cup. To understand how far Italy has fallen, you first need to understand what Italy actually was. Not in a romantic, sepia-toned, grandfather's stories kind of way. Factually, clinically, with full acknowledgement that what Serie A represented at its peak wasn't just a football league. It was the undisputed center of the sporting universe. The late 1980s, the entire 1990s, the early 2000s. Every generational talent on the planet had one destination, not England, not Spain, not Germany, Italy. Serie A wasn't competing for the world's best players. It was simply where they went, the way water flows downhill, inevitable, natural, without question. Maradona at Napoli, Van Basten at Milan, Ronaldo, the real Ronaldo, at Inter, Zidane at Juventus. These weren't transfers. These were pilgrimages. The greatest footballers alive choosing Italy, not because the money was slightly better, but because Serie A was the only stage on earth worthy of their talent. And what the league imported in star power, it manufactured in tactical genius. The defensive structures that came out of Italy during this era weren't just effective. They were studied, copied, feared. Italian coaches didn't just organize defenses, they engineered psychological traps. They built systems that made attacking football feel like an exercise in controlled humiliation. The players this environment produced were generational by default. Maldini, Baresi, Del Piero, Totti, Buffon, Cannavaro. Say those names to anyone who watched football between 1990 and 2006 and watch what happens to their face. That's not nostalgia. That's the recognition of genuine, undeniable, historically unprecedented quality concentrated in a single football culture over a single sustained period. And the crowning moment, the one that captured everything Italian football stood for, came in Germany. 2006. The Azzurri arrived at that World Cup mid-scandal. Calciopoli had just detonated across the domestic game like a bomb. Juventus relegated, points deducted, reputations shredded, the entire infrastructure of Italian football under criminal investigation. Any other nation would have arrived in Germany broken, distracted, psychologically shattered. Italy won the whole thing. Penalties against France in the final. After Zidane's headbutt lit the world on fire. That was Italian football, not just talented, constitutionally incapable of accepting defeat. A football culture so hardwired for resilience that external chaos functioned almost like fuel. That was the standard. Hold it there, fix it in your mind. Because what comes next is going to hurt. Nobody turned the lights off. in Italian football. That's what makes this so insidious. There was no single catastrophic moment, no earthquake, no scandal large enough to explain everything that followed. The decline of Italian football didn't announce itself. It leaked, quietly, persistently, until one day the bathtub was empty and everyone stood around pointing at each other, wondering what happened to the water. Let's talk about what actually happened. 2018, Russia, the World Cup. Italy didn't qualify. For the first time in 60 years, the Azzurri were absent from the biggest sporting event on the planet. Gianluigi Buffon, the greatest goalkeeper his country had ever produced, perhaps the greatest goalkeeper the world had ever seen, stood on the pitch in Milan after losing a playoff to Sweden and wept. This was supposed to be his final tournament, his farewell, his last act on the stage he dominated for 2 decades. Instead, it was just an ending, cold, quiet, without ceremony. The response from Italian football was swift and seemingly decisive. Reform, restructure, Roberto Mancini appointed, young players integrated, a new identity built around pressing, movement, and modern tactical principles. And then, 2021, Euro 2020, Wembley, penalties, glory. Italy were European champions. Mancini's side played some of the most exciting football the Azzurri had produced in a generation. It felt like a resurrection. It felt like the diagnosis had been wrong. It felt like Italy had simply needed a reset, one painful World Cup absence to shock the system back to life. It felt like recovery. It was actually a disguise. Because 14 months after that Wembley triumph, 14 months, not 14 years, Italy failed to qualify for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, beaten by North Macedonia. North Macedonia, a country with a population of 2 million people, smaller than the metropolitan area of Rome, a nation that had never previously qualified for a major tournament in its own right. They came to Palermo, and they ended Italy's World Cup dream with a goal in the 92nd minute. The Euro 2020 title hadn't fixed anything. It had simply provided a more comfortable place to ignore the rot. And now, a 3rd consecutive World Cup gone. At this point, pattern recognition isn't pessimism. It's diagnosis. But here's what the pattern is actually telling you, if you're willing to listen. This isn't about results. Results are symptoms. This is about infrastructure, finance, development, the invisible architecture that determines whether a football nation produces world-class players or merely adequate ones. Fabio Capello, a man who won league titles with Milan, Roma, and Juventus, who managed Real Madrid, who took England to a World Cup, has publicly stated that Serie A clubs cannot cope with the high-intensity pressing that defines modern European football. When Italian clubs face English or German opposition in European knockout football, the physical gap is not subtle, not debatable, visible. The revenue canyon between the Premier League and Serie A isn't growing. It already grew. English clubs now routinely spend, on a single signing, what Italian clubs allocate for an entire summer. The best young Italian talents no longer weigh up their options. They leave. In the 2023 to 2024 Champions League, no Italian club reached the semi-finals. Name 5 Serie A defenders right now who would walk into a Premier League title-winning side. Take your time. That silence isn't a pause. That silence is the answer. England invested over £1 billion into youth infrastructure. Germany rebuilt its entire academy system from the ground up after Euro 2000. France built Clairefontaine into the most sophisticated national football academy on earth. Spain exported La Masia's philosophy across an entire football culture. Every major footballing nation looked in the mirror, recognized what was staring back, and spent the money to fix it. Italy looked in the mirror, told itself it was still beautiful, and went back to bed. The talent pipeline that once produced Maldini and Totti and Buffon as a matter of routine, as if world-class players simply grew naturally from Italian soil, has slowed to a trickle. Not because Italian youth are less gifted, but because the development infrastructure, the coaching pathways, the financial investment in academies, all of it fell behind and kept falling. While everyone else was building, Italy was remembering. And you cannot win the future with memories. So here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because everything I just described, the infrastructure decay, the financial canyon, the talent pipeline running dry, the league losing its competitive edge against the modern European game, none of this was a secret. Someone saw it, someone named it, loudly, specifically, and with the kind of authority that should have made the entire Italian football establishment stop and actually listen. That someone walked into Rome in the summer of 2021 with a track record that no one in the sport could honestly dismiss. That someone was José Mourinho. Not a theorist, not an outsider with an agenda. The man who had managed at the absolute pinnacle of European football across 4 different countries. The man who had won the Champions League with Porto and with Inter. The man who had built inside Serie A, inside Italian football itself, one of the most complete club sides the continent had ever seen. When Mourinho arrived at Roma, he didn't come quietly. He never does. But beneath the theater, beneath the press conference performances, and the carefully constructed public persona, there was a manager with a genuine mission. He wanted to build something real at a club that had been surviving on identity and nostalgia for 30 years without a major trophy to show for it. And almost immediately, within weeks, he ran face first into every structural problem Italian football had been carefully, deliberately, and institutionally ignoring. The training facilities, substandard, not slightly below par, genuinely behind what he had worked with in England, in Spain, in Portugal, at clubs with less history and less cultural weight than Roma. The finances, ruinous. Roma could not compete in the transfer market with Premier League clubs spending more on a single January signing than Roma's entire summer budget combined. This wasn't a gap. This was a different conversation, happening in a different language, about a different sport. The officiating. Mourinho was convinced, and said so publicly, repeatedly with decreasing levels of diplomatic packaging, that the standard of refereeing in Serie A was actively damaging the product, not occasionally, structurally. He clashed with referees. He was banned. He came back and clashed with them again. He challenged the Italian Football Federation directly with the kind of bluntness that made Italian football administrators visibly uncomfortable because they weren't used to someone saying the quiet part out loud with a microphone in their hand. He called out the infrastructure. He called out the finances. He called out what he described as a culture of comfortable mediocrity, a collective, institutional willingness to accept decline as long as it arrived slowly enough that nobody had to take personal responsibility for it. And through all of it, through the touchline bans and the red cards and the press conference wars, he was actually performing. With a squad that, by his own honest assessment, was nowhere near the level required to compete at the top of European football, Mourinho dragged Roma to a Conference League title. In 2022, the club's first European trophy in 61 years, then a Europa League final in 2023. Minor miracles, built with limited resources, delivered by a manager who was simultaneously trying to renovate the house while loudly explaining to anyone who would listen that the foundations were cracked. The response from Italian football, largely dismissive. The media framed him as a bitter man, manufacturing excuses for underperformance. Pundits suggested he'd lost his edge, that the genius had faded, and the controversy was all that remained. Former players comfortable in their punditry roles implied he was past it. The Federation, with its characteristic institutional cowardice, said nothing at all, just waited, quietly, for the problem to go away. And then Roma sacked him. January 2024, mid-season, unceremonious. Mourinho, gone. Problem solved. Except, and this is the part that should make every Italian football administrator profoundly uncomfortable, it was never a problem with Mourinho. It was a problem with Italian football, and dismissing the one person willing to articulate it with precision and experience didn't fix anything. It just made the room quieter while the building continued to deteriorate. Then came December 2025. Mourinho, freed from the constraints of managing in Italy, freed from any contractual obligation to be careful with his words, said the thing that the entire Italian football ecosystem was constitutionally unprepared to hear. The quality of football in Italy has dropped. For me, there are no top players in Serie A, no top players in the entire league. The league that once housed Ronaldo and Zidane and Maldini, the league that was, for a decade and a half, the undisputed center of world football. Mourinho looked at it in 2025 and saw nobody operating at that level. And then he went further. He said that Lautaro Martinez, Inter Milan's star striker, the man who had won the Scudetto, the man celebrated across European football as one of the most complete forwards of his generation, would not have started a single game for his 2009-10 Inter side. The treble-winning Inter, the side that eliminated Barcelona and Bayern Munich in the same Champions League run, the masterpiece. Lautaro wouldn't have started, not once. Italian football lost its mind. Headlines screamed arrogance. Pundits called him delusional. Inter fans took it personally, as if Mourinho had walked into their homes and insulted their families. Social media became, predictably, a war zone of hot takes and wounded pride. But here's the thing. Here's the detail that everyone screaming about Mourinho's arrogance conveniently glossed over. Almost nobody actually engaged with the argument. They attacked the man, they questioned his motives, they recycled the bitterness narrative. He's still angry about being sacked. He's promoting himself. He's staying relevant through controversy. They did everything except sit down, look at the evidence honestly, and answer the one question that actually mattered. Was he right? Let's actually answer that question. Not emotionally, not defensively, not with the kind of knee-jerk tribalism that turns football discourse into a competition for who can be the most offended. Coldly, honestly, with the evidence laid out in front of us like a case file. Was José Mourinho right? Start with the claim about Lautaro Martinez. Lautaro is, by any reasonable measure, an excellent footballer, technically refined, physically imposing, a genuine leader at club level. In the context of modern Serie A, he is unquestionably the standard, the benchmark, the name opposition defenders circle on the team sheet before kickoff. But Mourinho wasn't comparing him to modern Serie A. He was comparing him to a specific squad, assembled at a specific moment, operating at a specific level of European football, that, and this is the part that requires intellectual honesty to acknowledge, simply does not exist in Italy right now. The 2009-10 Inter Milan front line featured Samuel Eto'o, Diego Milito, and Wesley Sneijder operating in concert. Behind them, Javier Zanetti, Esteban Cambiaso, Lucio, a spine built not just for quality, but for war. Players who had won things, players who knew what pressure at the highest level felt like in their bones, and who performed better because of it, not worse. Milito scored twice in the Champions League final against Bayern Munich at the Bernabeu with the entire weight of Inter's history on his shoulders. Lautaro Martinez is a very good striker, but that Inter squad was operating on a categorically different plane of existence. And the gap between very good in 2025 Serie A and world-class in 2010 Serie A is precisely the gap Mourinho was trying to force people to see. And it extends far beyond one player. Look at the defenders. In the 1990s, Serie A produced Maldini, Baresi, Nesta, Costa Curta, Cannavaro, and that's before you factor in the foreign elite the league was simultaneously attracting. Today, name 5 Serie A defenders who would walk into the starting 11 of Manchester City, Arsenal, or Real Madrid. You can't, because they don't exist in that league right now. Look at the Champions League numbers. In the 2023 to 2024 season, no Italian club reached the semi-finals. In the 5 seasons prior, Italian representation in the latter stages of the competition has been progressively, consistently, measurably declining. These aren't outliers. This is a trajectory. Look at the transfer market. The wage gap between the Premier League and Serie A is no longer a competitive disadvantage. It's a structural impossibility. English clubs operating in the bottom half of the Premier League table now offer wage packages that the most historically significant clubs in Italian football cannot match. Inter Milan, Juventus, AC Milan, clubs with global brands, global fan bases, global commercial operations, financially outgunned by mid-table English sides with a fraction of the cultural footprint. The consequence is binary and brutal. The best players leave, and the ones who stay develop in an environment of declining competitive intensity that leaves them underprepared for the moments that matter most. Look at the international stage. When Italian clubs face English or German opposition in European knockout football, the physical gap in pressing intensity, in athletic output, in the ability to sustain high-tempo football across 90 minutes is not subtle. Fabio Capello said it publicly. Fabio Capello, a man who won league titles with Milan, Roma, and Juventus, who managed Real Madrid, whose entire identity is built on Italian football's tradition of tactical excellence. Even he looked at what Serie A had become against the modern European standard and said, "We cannot keep up." That's not an outsider's critique. That's a eulogy delivered by a member of the family. And then there's the development pipeline. England, after their own years of international embarrassment, invested over £1 billion into youth infrastructure, St. George's Park, restructured academies, coaching education reformed from the grassroots up. The results are visible, not just in England's recent tournament performances, but in the sheer volume of technically developed English players now operating at the top of European club football. Germany responded to the humiliation of Euro 2000 by rebuilding their entire youth development system. The 2014 World Cup was the dividend. France built Clairefontaine into the most sophisticated national football academy on earth. Generation after generation of world-class talent, not by accident, not by luck, but by deliberate, sustained, financially committed design. Spain exported La Masia's philosophy across an entire football culture and produced the most dominant international period any nation has achieved in the modern era. And Italy? Italy had the history. Italy had the infrastructure in place. Italy had the coaching tradition, the tactical knowledge, the cultural passion that most footballing nations would trade significant portions of their future for. And Italy chose to protect what it had rather than evolve it. The academies fell behind, the coaching pathways stagnated, the financial investment dried up, and the players who emerged from this environment, technically capable, tactically aware, but physically underprepared and competitively undertested, arrived at international tournaments and discovered repeatedly that the rest of the world had been training for a different, harder, faster version of the same sport. So when Mourinho said, "There are no top players in Serie A," he wasn't being provocative for the sake of provocation. He was making a clinical observation from a position of unmatched comparative experience. He had managed world-class players. He had built world-class environments. He knew, with the precision of someone who had operated at the summit of the sport across multiple countries and multiple eras, exactly what world-class looked like. And he looked at Serie A in 2025, and he didn't see it. The evidence doesn't argue with him. The Champions League results don't argue with him. The transfer market reality don't argue with him. The 3 consecutive World Cup absences, 3, don't argue with him. The only people arguing with him are the ones who confused attacking the messenger with answering the message. And that distinction, that specific, revealing, deeply uncomfortable distinction, is where the real indictment begins. So if the evidence is this clear, if the data is this unambiguous, if the trajectory has been this visible, this consistent, this documented, not just by outsiders but by people who built their entire lives inside Italian football, then we have to ask the question that Italian football has been architecturally designed to avoid. Who is actually responsible for this? Not rhetorically, not as a conversation starter, as a genuine, serious, accountability-demanding question that deserves a genuine, serious, uncomfortable answer. Because here's what I've noticed. In every public conversation about Italy's decline, every panel discussion, every newspaper column, every federation press release, there is a remarkable consistency in what gets discussed and what gets quietly, carefully, institutionally omitted. They talk about the players, they talk about the coaches, they talk about tactical systems and generational gaps and the randomness of football and the cruelty of playoff formats. They do not talk about the people who made the decisions. The administrators, the federation officials, the club presidents, and sporting directors and committee members who controlled the financial priorities, the development investments, the structural choices that determined over 20 years, one decision at a time, what Italian football would look like in 2025. Those people are not on the panels. They are not answering questions. They are not sitting in front of cameras explaining why the billion-pound investment in youth infrastructure that England made, that Germany made, that France had already made, was never seriously considered in Italy. They are simply elsewhere, comfortable, largely unaccountable, protected by the institutional opacity that governing bodies in football have perfected into an art form. And this is the most damning indictment of all. Not the results. Results are consequences. The indictment is the system that produced the results and then insulated the people responsible for that system from any meaningful consequences whatsoever. Think about what Mourinho actually represented in this story. He was not just a manager with a loud personality and a complicated relationship with authority. He was, functionally, whether anyone intended it or not, the only person with sufficient standing, sufficient credibility, and sufficient disregard for political consequences to walk into Italian football and say, "The house is on fire, and nobody is calling it a fire." He had the titles, he had the trophies, he had the comparative experience across leagues and cultures that made his observations impossible to dismiss on technical grounds. You couldn't tell Mourinho he didn't understand football. You couldn't tell him he hadn't seen what world class looked like up close. You couldn't tell him he was confusing passion for analysis. So they told him he was bitter instead. They told him he was self-promoting. They told him he was manufacturing controversy to stay relevant. They pulled out every tool in the institutional dismissal kit, and there are many. They are well practiced, and they used all of them, because using them was infinitely easier than doing what his warnings actually required. Listening would have meant acting. Acting would have meant admitting that the problems were structural, deep, expensive, and, most politically inconvenient of all, that the people responsible for allowing those structural problems to compound over 2 decades were still in their positions, still drawing their salaries, still representing Italian football on the international stage. You can fire a manager. You cannot fire an institutional culture. Or rather, you can. But it requires exactly the kind of honest, uncomfortable, politically costly reckoning that football governing bodies in every country have demonstrated repeatedly and across generations, a profound constitutional reluctance to undertake. So, they fired Mourinho instead, and called it a solution. And now Italy is home again, watching a World Cup that is happening without them for the 3rd consecutive time in a tournament that once felt like their birthright, where 4 gold stars on a shirt meant something that transcended sport and became national identity. 4 stars, no tournament. The mathematics of that should be enough to end careers, to trigger genuine institutional reform, to produce the kind of honest public accounting that the situation objectively demands. Instead, what you'll get, what you always get, is a new manager, a new project, a new cycle of cautious optimism, carefully designed to last just long enough for everyone to forget who was in charge when the collapse happened. And maybe that optimism will be partially justified. Maybe Italy will qualify for the next World Cup. Maybe a talented generation will emerge. Maybe the sugar rush will come again, like it did in 2021, and for a brief, brilliant moment, it will feel like recovery. But recovery built on the same foundations produces the same results. And here's what nobody in Italian football, nobody with actual institutional power, is willing to say. The gap is still growing. Not stabilizing, not closing, growing. While Serie A debates its own internal politics, the Premier League ecosystem is accelerating. While Italian clubs protect their financial models, English clubs are building competitive advantages that will take a decade to close, even with perfect decisions starting today. The window is not open indefinitely. Football history is littered with nations that were once dominant, once defining, once essential to the sport's identity, and then became cautionary tales, comfortable reminders of what happens when institutions prioritize self-preservation over honest evolution. Italian football is not there yet, but it is closer than it has ever been. And the man who told them that, the one loud, difficult, dramatically imperfect Portuguese manager who walked into Rome and held up a mirror, sure was right. About the infrastructure, about the finances, about the talent pipeline, about the competitive environment, about all of it. Every single warning, verified by results. Which leaves us with the only question that actually matters now. Not whether Italy will recover. They will, eventually. The history is too rich, the passion too embedded, the cultural relationship with football too fundamental to the national identity for the decline to be permanent. The question is whether Italian football will finally do what it refused to do when Mourinho was saying it. Look honestly at who made the decisions, demand honest answers about why those decisions were made, and hold the right people, not the managers, not the players, but the architects of the system, accountable for what those decisions produced. Or they'll wait for someone quieter, someone more palatable, someone who packages the same diagnosis in language that doesn't make the federation uncomfortable. And that person will eventually come, and Italian football will nod politely, and commission a report, and form a committee, and miss another World Cup. Because the problem was never José Mourinho. The problem was a system that found it easier to dismiss the warning than to act on it. And until that system changes, not its personnel, not its branding, not its public messaging, but its fundamental willingness to be honest, about itself. Nothing else will. So I'll leave you with this. Not a summary. You've heard the evidence. You don't need it repeated. Not a solution. Anyone offering you a clean package solution to a problem this deep and this structural is selling you something. Just a question, one question, and I want you to sit with it, honestly, not as a fan, not as someone protecting a footballing identity you grew up with, but as someone who actually cares about what the sport looks like when it's operating at its absolute ceiling. If the most qualified person in the room is saying the house is on fire, and the room decides to remove that person instead of picking up a hose, what does that tell you about the room? Because that's not a football question. That's a question about institutions, about power, about the specific kind of organizational cowardice that dresses itself up as stability and calls dismissal a decision. Italian football answered that question in January 2024. The World Cup is answering it now. I want to know where you stand on this. Not the comfortable answer, the honest one. Do you think Italian football's decline is reversible? And if so, what actually needs to change beyond appointing a new manager and hoping for a better generation? Or do you think the structural problems are now so deeply embedded that recovery, real recovery, is further away than anyone in a position of power is willing to publicly admit? Write it below. Specific, argued. No tribalism. The best comment in this thread gets pinned, and I read every single one. Not as a gesture, but because the most interesting football analysis I've encountered in the last year has come from people in comment sections who have no platform, no agenda, and no institutional reputation to protect. And if this kind of analysis, cold, evidence-based, allergic to comfortable narratives, is what you came here for, then you already know what to do. There are no algorithms being gamed here, no manufactured controversies designed to drive engagement, no hot takes dressed up as insight. Just the argument, built carefully, delivered straight. If that's what you want more of, subscribe. Not as a favor, as a decision. Because the next video is already built around a question that is, if anything, more uncomfortable than this one. We're going to talk about a football nation that had every structural advantage, the investment, the infrastructure, the coaching philosophy, the political will, and still found a way to systematically waste a golden generation. The name might surprise you, or it might be exactly who you're already thinking of. Either way, you should probably be here for it. Same place. Next time. Don't be late.